Good evening, everybody. Wait for the last few, just came in to find a seat. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our third lecture in this year's series, our Social Justice Lecture Series. Like any community, here in Vallejo, we have a strong history and diversity from the contributions of so many generations that we want to honor and remember. Our event tonight takes place on traditional coastal Miwok land, and we want to recognize their stewardship of this area for generations. As we embark on our conversation this evening and listen to the words of our honored speaker, we remember those that have come before us and that continue their work in those traditions. And we also remember the activities that are going around us on all parts of the globe as we come off of the global climate strike last Friday. We continue into the Climate Justice Week, and on the evening tonight of the United Nations Climate Justice meeting in New York. We will keep all of that in our thoughts as we listen to the words of Mr. Tom Goldtooth. So I want to first, before I give you the full introduction of our speaker, I'm just going to offer the podium to our dean, the dean of the College of Education and Health Sciences, Dean Norton, who's going to say a few words.
All right, hello. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see all our students and community members. I'm Dr. Lisa Norton, so I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Health Sciences, which encompasses our wonderful public health program along with our physician assistant / public health program, School of Nursing, and Graduate School of Education. So I really want to welcome you all to, this is actually our 5th year of the Social Justice Series that Public Health has put on. So why do we do the Social Justice Series? The Social Justice Series is embedded in our mission here at Touro University, California, because as we're educating our students to be the next wave of healthcare and educators in both the California community and beyond, we really want to ensure that we're doing healthcare and education in a different way. So we want to ensure that our healthcare and education programs are instilled with diversity, equity, inclusion, and really are helping us look at healthcare in a much different way to practice. And so I'm so excited. This is probably our premier event every year. Those of you from the community, can you raise your hand? Not to put you on the spot, but if you're a community member, can you raise your hand high? Great. Well, we offer this as a free service to our community to kind of talk about varying issues that are of instrumental importance to our world, environmental justice being one of them. If we do not take care of our earth, none of us will be here, for the long term. Our children won't be here for the long term. And so it's fundamental. I do want to say that sometimes the opinions of our panelists do not always reflect the opinions of everyone at Touro University, California, but I think this is the whole point of being an educational institution, is to really introduce our students and community members to a lot of different ideas that are maybe different from what we've been taught traditionally. So I welcome you to dialogue with us and discuss with us. I also, are there any social justice fellows that are in the room right now? Raise your hand. I know I always put you on the spot. Raise your hand high. So I want you all to know that we actually fund several students from our diversity scholarship funds to become social justice fellows that help us in the creation of these and also help us with sometimes the Q&A for our classes, etc. So I do have some cards if those of you are interested in donating to help us continue to fund our students in our social justice mission. So I have some with me today. I'll leave some at the front, but want to definitely encourage our community members to think about giving back to Touro because you are actually creating different types of future citizens and partnerships in the community. So we welcome you to kind of help us and support us in this. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and keep on with the program. But thank you all so much, students, community members, for being here. We're just so excited to be here on Mare Island and offer these opportunities to Vallejo, the most diverse city in the nation, which also has its own set of issues and challenges that we're all working to kind of grapple together. So thank you all so much, and I look forward so much to your presentation.
All right, well, so it is truly an honor. I'm really thankful that we could welcome Dr. Tom Goldtooth all the way from Minnesota here today in person. Since the late 1980s, he's been involved with environmental related issues and programs, working within tribal governments in developing indigenous-based environmental protection infrastructures. Tom works with indigenous peoples worldwide. He is known as one of the environmental justice movement grassroots leaders in North America, addressing toxics and health, mining, energy, climate, water, globalization, sustainable development, and indigenous rights issues. He is one of the founders of the Durban Group of Climate Justice, the co-founder of Climate Justice Now, a co-founder of the US-based Environmental Justice Climate Change Initiative, a member of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change that operates as the Indigenous Caucus within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He's a policy advisor to Indigenous communities on environmental protection, and more recently on climate policy, focusing on mitigation, adaptation, and concerns of false solutions. He has been the executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network since 1996, and in 2015, he was awarded the prestigious Gandhi Peace Award. It's truly an honor to have him here. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Goldtooth.
Thank you. Well, I forget I've done all those things, huh? Well, good afternoon. It's really good to be here. I'm actually catching my breath because I left home last Monday, and I've been around the Bay Area. We brought a delegation from Brazil, indigenous community in Brazil, from Acre. Brought folks from Ecuador, from the Amazon, from the Siriacu. Brought one of our sisters from Chiapas, Mexico, and a brother from Indonesia. So we've been busy with the California Air Resources Board on providing some testimony on the impact of California's AB 32 on the 4 provisions of carbon offsets, and the recent standard that California unfortunately passed, in my opinion, the Tropical Forest Standard. It's going to be a model that's going to be, California hopes will be adopted throughout the world, developing countries, for furthering the implementation of carbon offsets, forest offsets in the tropical Amazon area. So we brought a delegation that's very concerned about the lack of safeguards, human rights implications. And actually, it's a mechanism that doesn't cut emissions at source. It allows Chevron and Shell and polluting industry in the north to write off, you could say write off, or appear to look carbon neutral when they said, well, we're buying carbon credits in the global south to conserve and protect trees. But at the same time, they're increasing emissions in the north, creating toxic hotspot in the nearby communities. So it's an environmental justice issue. We've been trying to wake up a lot of different groups and governments and about this initiative, about this. It's part of the climate justice work that we're doing. And so that's one aspect that we work on. Oh, catching my breath. How me dakyapi? Hello relations. Chante washtea na pechi yazapado. From my heart, I shake your hands, all of you. I am from Minnesota. It's the center of the universe. I chuckle when I say that because I was in South Africa one year and I was talking to some Khoisan people and they asked where I was from. I said, where I'm from. And I said, I'm from the center of the universe. And the elders there started talking to each other and they have that little click in their dialect. And then they got back and there's a translator and said they're confused because they come from the center of the universe. Yeah. So it was a door opener with them. So I'm Dakota and Navajo. My mom is Dene from New Mexico. Anyone from New Mexico? All right. Anyone from Minnesota? All right, way back there. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Marshall, Bemidji, Duluth. All right. And it's good to be here. I come to California every now and then on some of the work I do. Let me kind of give some quick overview because I have a film that I want to show you. Our network started in 1990. There was a time when a lot of the waste, solid waste companies like Waste Management, BFI, and many others were looking for places to store toxic waste. There was a term, as some of you have looked into environmental policy and environmental justice, a term called not in my backyard, or NIMBY. It was a time of NIMBY, and it was a time that, in fact, a lot of the companies started to look at rural America, looking at places not only in the Deep South that impacted African American communities, but started to look in rural America, South Dakota, for an example, to store toxic waste, to dump toxic waste, and these partnership agreements with tribes. It was a time when the dangers of groundwater contamination from open dumps that aren't lined, there was a lot of those kind of open dumps back then, and EPA passed a new standard, in fact, a new policy, that if any jurisdiction that has unlined landfills, that they can be penalized $25,000 a day. So that really alarmed a lot of our tribes. A lot of our tribes did not have an environmental protection infrastructure in place, which was an environmental justice issue. State governments by that 1990-91 had all developed environmental protection programs and received delegated authority from the US EPA to operate their programs. California has that, but not the tribes, totally left out. So that was one of the environmental justice issues that we lifted up back in the early 90s when it comes to environmental protection in Indian country, within the American Indian tribes and Alaska villages as well. No one was watching the shop. Like in California, you got the Air Resources Board. You got California Environmental Protection Agency. You got someone that has a responsibility to help in the decision-making on some facility that's being built, on different things that may impact not only environmental protection of the soil and the air, but also human health, health exposure. There's people working in that area as well, public health. Not so in Indian country. We have Indian Health Service, which is a federal agency of the Health and Human Services, but they've always been underfunded. And it's not there, they just don't have the capacity to study health impacts, health exposure, impacts to the human health of our peoples. So that was back in the 90s, and it's still pretty much the same right now. So that was a scenario of how IEN got formed by youth and elders and women groups that were concerned about our community, our health, and said no to toxic waste dumping, no to nuclear waste proposals back then. Mining that basically were unmanaged, mining activities, you name it. And they felt that tribal members as grassroots said, we need to address this issue. We need a sounding board. We need a network. And that was the formation of our network as Indigenous peoples around environmental issues. That was in 1990. I came on board in 1991, coming from I had a position as a director of environmental protection program for one of the largest tribes in Minnesota, the Red Lake Band of Ojibwe in northern Minnesota. So I stepped down from that and took the helm of a grassroots nonprofit organization. By the mid-90s, there was a lot of issues coming up around certain chemicals that are out there that bioaccumulate in the food system, fish, for an example, loon eggs up in northern Canada. We were concerned because that's the food system of many of our native peoples. And no one really had the data as far as the specific impact to native people that have high consumption levels of different fish, like in Minnesota and other regions of North America. And then we got involved in a UN initiative to reduce and eliminate various chemicals, including dioxin, PCBs. By that time, in the United States, PCB was basically, outlawed, restricted. Technologies had changed, but dioxin was still being released at that time, still to some degree from the pulp and paper mills, like in Minnesota and other areas of the country. So we got involved with this issue. But trying to get that political will to look at chemicals as a human rights issue was a very big concern of ours as we brought our voices to the United Nations arena. Back in those early years, the human rights NGOs and the environmental NGOs weren't working together. And I like to feel we played a role on bringing them together because this was a human rights issue. This was an Indigenous people's right of Indigenous peoples to have a healthy environment and to be able to be healthy. I'm going to show this real quick, and that's going to open the door to some things I want to talk about. So just bear along with me. I hope the sound system is going to be okay, and I was one of the co-producers of this. There you go. Thank you for your patience. That kind of tells a lot of what I want to talk about, what I was going to talk about, what I want to talk about. It highlights a number of issues. How humanity's relationship to the sacredness of Mother Earth, humanity's relationship to the female creative principle, the relationship between Mother Earth and Father Sky, climate. In the movie in the film, people were saying, this is serious and we need to take action now. And that's with toxic chemicals. And there's still, I don't know, some of you study this, there's still releases of toxic chemicals in this country. And now we're facing the climate crisis. The youth had their climate strike this past weekend. The messaging again is that this is now and it's critical. We need to take action now. And in this film, I have a history of taking on the industry. And it looks like it's repeating itself again. I'm taking on the industry, the polluting industry, fossil fuel industry. And they have their attorneys, like this attorney was talking. They have a handle on it. They're convincing. They're steady in the situation. So what was the solution of reducing and eliminating chemicals? Yes, there was an agreement finally at a couple years after this where the United Nations and the governments who came together made an agreement. But then those agreements that they make in Geneva, they have to go back home to get them ratified. So because of the power of the chemical industry, the United States Senate still hasn't ratified the POPs Treaty. How many people know that? Some of you are going to be practitioners out there. This film showed of some of the racism that exists, environmental protection that doesn't protect populations out there. It's not just our Native American peoples that have a high intake of fish from contaminated areas. During that time, Southeast Asia, the Hmong, the Vietnamese, in Minnesota, where fishing have a high level consumption rate. So where does racism fit in here? Why is it that American Indians and Alaska Natives were still fighting for our treaty rights, the recognition of our treaty rights in 2019? In 2016, many of you tuned in to Standing Rock, South Dakota, or North Dakota, where that Standing Rock camp was on the North Dakota side. Why is it that the federal agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers and the US EPA weren't standing on the side of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe saying that you have to implement a full-blown environmental impact statement? Why were they saying that we as tribes did not have the capacity at that time to study all the cultural resource sites, to inventory all the sacred sites? And the state of North Dakota says, well, we've done our job. Those of you that tuned in to Standing Rock, some of the film, there was a bulldozing that took place on one of those days of a sacred site. And they knew it was a sacred site. And it was damaged. How do you mitigate that? How do you reconcile that? How do you restore that sacred site? So we have the same situation still to this day. There have been some improvements, yes. We still have coalitions with African American, with Asian, Latino, and poor white folks. They still are working to hold the U.S. federal government accountable in environmental protection, in environmental health, public health, to where there is disproportionate impact. Why is it that the community enrichment still continue to have respiratory illnesses from the emissions from the refinery? California has taken on the challenges of climate change, right? But when the community enrichments questions Chevron, so why aren't you cutting back on your emissions, your greenhouse gases? They're expanding. And I'm just saying this in my own observation. But they are saying something like this. You don't understand. Community says, what is it we don't understand? We've gone carbon neutral. We have offset our carbon. And the community says, what do you mean by that? My people are still getting sick and dying from your pollution. Well, we balanced the pollution because we're buying carbon credits in the trees in the Amazon. Don't you support the Amazon? They said, well, I still don't understand. That doesn't help us out. So that's what the corporations are saying in the hallways of the United Nations. They establish goals for achieving certain emissions reductions. They're using the word net, N-E-T, net zero emissions. Not just zero emissions by 2050, 2030, net zero emissions. So as you look at the language in the Paris Agreement that was agreed upon in 2015, it has a lot of carbon market mechanisms in there, clean development mechanisms in there. You can Google search that, because to go into that discussion, I need at least a 4-hour workshop with you. But it's full of that, what we call false solutions. It has mechanisms in there recognizing genetic, GE engineering technologies, carbon capture and storage. That's still being experimented, still being studied, but companies are using that now. And they're using that in their mathematics. Net zero emissions, meaning that they can demonstrate that they have reduced their emissions by participating in carbon trading, cap and trade, carbon offsets. And they have achieved emissions reductions by this and this and that. Without considering some of the things that scientists within those hallways are still debating. Leakage. Leakage. How do you prevent leakage? How do you take into consideration the leakage of carbon that's supposed to be sequestered, that Chevron is credited now with? 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, 1 year, there might be a crack in the Mother Earth or a fissure, and that greenhouse gas is released. In the meantime, the industry is continuing to pollute. They've offset it 5 years ago. How can they get away with that? Ponzi scams. We trusted Enron. We seem to trust, again, these mitigation efforts. Now, human rights, indigenous rights. In these areas like in Ecuador, social bosque, these parks, forests, tree parks. Now they're owned by the companies because the company owns the carbon through carbon credits in the trees. That's their trees. And they're preventing local forest-dependent communities from accessing those trees. Indigenous peoples can't go in there and utilize the materials of the trees. Many still have subsistence cultures. So they have park police. You can Google search that. Privatization, commodification. You can't trade air. You can't trade carbon in a market system unless it involves treating it as a commodity. And you can't treat it as a commodity until you determine whose property right it is. Now it's a property right issue. As we consulted with our spiritual leaders, not only in the North but in the South, shamans in the South, the concept of ownership of the air and the carbon, who owns that is the property right. Privatization. The same way privatization of water. Now the privatization of air, the trading of air. The companies owning the carbon, the credits being exchanged. So this film that we put together was an indication of what's to come. That we have to be strategic and tactical, more so now. As we look at the politics that exist, the weakening of environmental laws, where are we now? The role of the economic system, capitalism. If it's barely hanging on by a thread, it's going to do everything it can to survive. Terminology like financialization of nature. Google search that. Financialization of nature. A friend of mine, Jutta Kill, Juttakill, Jutta Kill. She's from Germany. She's a researcher, a staff person with the World Rainforest Movement. She's been studying forest sinks the carbon in the forest for many years. She's an expert. We brought her to the California Air Resources Board. We had good researchers there providing testimony on what I'm talking about. And we had Indigenous peoples sharing firsthand their experience. Yeah. So where are we at now? One of the things that we've been doing as IEN is we'll continue to play an advocacy role and engage in organizing in Indian country with frontline communities that are taking on these international corporations, the pipelines, yes, fossil fuel development, fracking, yes, toxic polluting facilities, yes. But in our travels, people say, we know what you're against, but what are you for? So we've been moving towards developing a campaign around just transition. Around, this area where, like at Navajo, there's a shutdown of a coal-fired power plant. And the workers were concerned about the Navajo workers, their union, and their Navajo, because it's a coal-fired power plant that was sited on the reservation in northern Arizona. So who's going to provide retraining for them? And where's the funding going to come from? Especially when it was the federal government who brokered the deal in the first place. And many people in America don't know that there's federal agencies like the Bureau of Indian Affairs as part of the Interior Department that brokers a lot of these extractive industrial developments in Indian country in the first place. That's their mandate, is to develop within Indian country. Not many people know that. And if you look at, like I said at the beginning, many areas of Indian country in the early 90s did not have environmental protection programs. We were part of bringing that issue up in the early 90s. 0.1% of the EPA budget was earmarked for Indian country for environmental planning. Only a few tribes had somebody on staff. Now I can say every tribe has funding from the regional EPA to have someone on staff, or maybe a couple on staff. Some other larger tribes have a whole department. Some of it's catch-up. In Canada, it's different. In the tar sands of Canada, it's a different scenario. They don't have environmental staff. But yet they get tonnage of volumes, I call it tonnage, of environmental assessments that they have to review on the expansion of the tar sands industrial complex. That's what flows to the Enbridge Line 3, or they're trying to develop. That's what flows to KXL pipeline. Yeah. That's what they're trying to bring here to be refined in your backyard. Is the tar sands, crude oil. Very toxic, synthetic. It's not like the oil of yesterday. So those are the struggles we're continuing to fight, and provide some solutions, helping to reinvest divestment money into communities to develop renewable energy in their communities, food production, food sovereignty, to grow our own food, to develop our own homes outside of a HUD program, utilizing our traditional housing designs and local materials. And sure, still going down to the Menards and getting lumber, but a lot of it, can be acquired from trees. Those kind of things. To decolonize ourselves. In fact, part of that is challenging humanity to decolonize yourself. To address the issues of the heavy consumption of energy in this country. To address the issues of reducing the waste of America. We waste too much. So part of that decolonization process is language restoration as well. A whole process of colonization and assimilation and acculturation, and the role of the church. Has caused this loss of our culture and our spirituality. No one ever asks if we have our own Genesis. What do you believe in? We were redefined as being pagans. Pagans. We weren't civilized. But there's a whole history of that, on how another country can come and invade another country. You need the church. They needed the church to say we're less than human. When you're less than human, they can come in and occupy your country. And the church can take responsibility to save us So those are long problems that, yes, we have inherited. Our babies now, they they grow up saying, why do I feel different? I feel like I'm a dirty Indian. So as parents, we gotta lift them up and have them be proud of who they are. It is a people of color. It is a racist issue. And we're still confronting that in this country. The American Indian, Alaska Native. Many of the immigrants coming from the South are indigenous peoples. They're indigenous peoples. How many of you know that? Some of them, in order to get by, it's easier to say that they're mestizo or Mexican than indigenous. Why do we have societies like that? So those are some of the things I wanted to share with you in your work, and that you're going to be doing as practitioners. Where does the social injustice come in? Where do the human rights come in? How does racism play in your work as you go and work in communities where there's extreme poverty? Yeah. So this film I wanted to show, it took up a lot of my time, but again, it profiled a lot of things. The Quichin there, Sarah James that was singing the song at the beginning, Faith Gemmell, who was holding the baby from Arctic Village. Now, full circle, the government and the fossil fuel industry want to open up oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, ANWR. You thought we stopped that 10 years ago, eh? Trump is pushing that, opening up Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Her community, in addition to the toxic contamination, now have to get organized to stop a whole industry. Yeah. So some of the issues in there, some of the people passed on. Jackie Rolito passed on. A lot of people are not with us in that film. It was an award-winning film. We showed it all over the country and the world. Yeah. But it talks about the connection to the sacred elements, the wind, the air, the water, the fire. Because that's our connection to the sacredness of Mother Earth. And another campaign that we develop is, as far as systems change, is joining the Global Alliance on Rights of Nature, which are not indigenous peoples, but they've learned, like in Africa, from the customary rights of the tribal people of Africa in the relationship to the land and the mother and the animals, customary rights. And they're learning from us in the North, using the concepts of earth jurisprudence, the inherent rights of Mother Earth. And to challenge now with our work on the missing Native woman and the violence against our women, lifting up the issues of objectification of our woman is no different than the objectification of Mother Earth. Yeah. So there's a link in all this, eh? And the relationship to that sacredness of Mother Earth again. What happened in Europe when that relationship and that teaching was destroyed, that identity of the tribalism of Europe, that relationship of the mother of the lake. Where is that? So that's what we're part of, is talking about our prophecies, talking about our teachings. And there are cultures in other parts of the world where we have a lot in common. We sit down and starting to talk about the future of humanity. And it is a time we have to start working together, healing historical trauma that has kept us separate. And some of it's going to be hard, like any movements of putting the reality on the table and talking it out. So that's kind of where we're at as an Indigenous Environmental Network. We have some people in Napa Valley up the road at the Environmental Grant Makers Association. So we're trying to educate the environmental grant makers who are project officers, who have trustees and board, who have wealth. Some of them are invested in these false solutions of climate change. But we're not walking away, we're challenging them. Yeah. So with that, I think I wanted to leave 20 minutes for some questions and answers. So I'm going to stop right there. Is that helpful? Yeah?
I'm going to grab this mic and we'll open up the floor for questions. Please raise your hand. I'll come around and pass the mic to you.
Don't be shy. I was a shy little res boy one time before I left the reservation.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and elaborating on the issues. Thank you for coming and elaborating on the issues of Indigenous people. I was just curious, can you explain a little bit further the meaning of the net zero emissions? That you're saying it's not a true zero emissions, how they get away with it?
Yeah, well, we're for zero emissions. It's just the way that the term net has been used as an economic term, as a measurement that allows multiple mechanisms to be used to demonstrate that zero emissions has been achieved. Like I said, it allows mechanisms for carbon offsets. Say this is happening now in some areas to where hydro dams are being considered clean, renewable energy. And in Minnesota, there's been Cree people coming from Canada, from Manitoba Hydro, who have been coming down and lobbying the state legislature on not to include hydro dams, hydroelectric as clean, because it's been devastating to the homelands of the Cree people, ruining their trap lines and their livelihood. That happens all over the world. In India, dams have been developed. In Brazil, the flooding of the territories of the Xingu people. And that is actually can be used to demonstrate by 2020, 2030, 2050 as zero emissions, these mechanisms. So we got to really look at what are the mechanisms that are going to be used for coming up to the reporting of how the governments have achieved zero emissions. We got to be more critical on that and include more of the public, civil society in that. Who is doing the monitoring? It came up in this CARD meeting. The industry is the one who's doing the monitoring. The consultants are doing the monitoring. California said, well, we got a handle on it to make sure that there's no violations in the implementation of tropical forest standards. That's where civil society has to be involved in these, yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Hi, thank you again for coming. I'm wondering how our students, who are some are will be clinicians and others public health practitioners, can best support making sure that the rights and cultural, cultural rights as well are not only preserved but respected as they're seeing patients and as they are going about practicing public health.
There's a couple. There's a library of a lot of the reports and documentation that's been compiled. Clark University in Atlanta, GA. A colleague of mine, Dr. Robert Bullard, has made a really good initiative for collecting data. There's many different reports out there that have lifted up these issues of disproportionate impact on certain populations of people, this case race. University of Michigan as well has been one of the leaders in environmental health issues as well, and they have used in the early years equity, racial, environmental equity issue, then switched it to environmental racism. It was safer in the university to use the word equity than racism. The system is uncomfortable when you say racism. And you could get confronted with that if you're doing studies on disproportionate impacts, high exposure, disproportionate exposure. We've been still pushing throughout the years, CDC in Atlanta, to get a better handle on this issue. The different federal agencies that are tasked to study environmental health issues and looking at it from the framework of environmental injustice. I think there definitely is a need for more work to be done in this. So there's definitely a resource list out there to get more information on this. Yeah, way back in the back. Yeah.
Thank you and welcome. I have a question on your land, indigenous land. Have you been violated by having toxic waste dump sites set in place on certain areas of your land?
That reminded me in a way, first time I've been to this island, I came off the road and I didn't know where I was heading, maybe, how many people live here on the island? Yeah. I'm sorry, I thought it was coming to Area 51 in Nevada. But as I got, a history lesson by the faculty here, definitely it brought up a lot of the issues that I've been dealing with in our network, not only in our Native communities, but also with other people of color communities. Concerning, contamination in the soil. I'm sure you're not allowed to dig into the soil around here. And I could just assume how it is around here with the naval facility here and the chemicals that were utilized. And there are certain areas in American Indian or Alaska Native lands that is really contaminated, where there hasn't been any remediation. Alaska is one of those areas. The formerly used defense facilities, FUDs. There's areas up as you go further up north in Alaska, like the Barrow, Alaska, up above there, above Nome. During the Cold War, there's a lot of experimentation that was initiated by the military at these formerly used defense facilities. And And in fact, in making of this film, that was a time when there was a lot of these issues being brought up to the federal agencies and putting pressure on the EPA to get a better handle on this. Unfortunately, commitments that were made under previous administrations were not carried over. That's still, to me, an outstanding issue up in Alaska on these formerly used defense facilities. The same thing in different areas in Nevada on the experimentation of the nuclear bombs and cancer clusters along the path. I forgot what the International Cancer Institute, I think that was the name, but there seemed to be a fallout path from Nevada that goes up towards Montana to southern Alberta, Canada. There seems to also be some health effects from that. The Mohawks in New York, with the Reynolds aluminum and other smelters that were operating along the St. Lawrence River corridor, there's a lot of contamination, PCB and other chemicals in the riverbed of the St. Lawrence River. There's no more turtle population in that area, so those people that have a relationship to the turtle clan, there's no more turtles there in that area. Cleanup is still a problem, and one of the words bottlenecked is around the differences in how clean is clean. The native people there, they want it cleaned as clean as possible. EPA in negotiation with the industry, it's a legal issue. It's a legal question. How clean is clean? So the best scenario there is you just don't disturb the riverbed. So nothing's being done. But there's still people going out and fishing. Montana, gold mining, Fort Belknap. A lot of the residue from the gold mining operation up there has been used as the foundation for the schools, as making concrete. It's been a really big issue with the mining operations up there, arsenic, other contaminants, and some evidence with the children who are now adults. So that issue still continues in different reservations. Tribes are continuing to try to get resources for cleanup. Yeah. Someone else had their hand up.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us today and telling us about your work. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you used to be a little more quiet when you were growing up on the reservation. Would you be able to share with us a little about how you found your voice and what motivated you to stand up for environmental justice?
Good question. On the Navajo side, anyone been up to the Navajo reservation? And how about around north of Flagstaff going to Utah, Fredonia, North Rim, Grand Canyon? Anyone been up in that area? That's where I was raised. Marble Canyon was like a little trading post. In fact, the only place where a lot of settlers crossed the Colorado River was a place called Lee's Ferry. It was a crossing there to where they could get over. They don't have to drop their horses and their wagons from the cliffs of the canyon, Lee's Ferry, and they were able to come down a valley. So I was raised not far from there. There's a lot of tourists that came in there. Not like a lot of tourists, but a few tourists come in summertime. And I noticed they like to buy rocks. You know, we used to drive to Flagstaff, Arizona, and I noticed that tourists like to buy stones. So I used to just collect stones and just put them on a table and sell rocks. And they would buy rocks. Yeah. But I was still shy, meaning I didn't know how to communicate that much. You know, I was raised on a reservation. And my mom, it's interesting because my mom was more progressive. The word traditional to us is someone that the traditional still, the family maintains the ceremonies and traditional old ways of living. Then the progressives, the ones that more assimilated to the white man's way, maybe went to college. Acculturation is a factor there, and then traditional, the ones that still wear their hair long, smell like smoke because we're still burning cooking fires. Yeah. So I was raised both ways. My dad was more traditional family. Okay. My mom was more progressive. She went to college. So that's how I was raised by my grandparents. When she went to college, she left me with her mom and dad. And she's one of our first Navajo women and first Native woman to get a degree in microbiology. She went into the medical profession. She became a medical technologist. So on this side, the familiar smell of the laboratories, you know, the whites, you know. And she was also a teacher of many other young Navajo students, eventually going and become medical doctors. They interned with her. And so I come from that community as well as this, so I was pulled both ways. And in that, I held back a lot. I felt more comfortable in this community, and that's why I say I was shy. And my mom had eventually moved to Phoenix, Arizona. Okay, and I don't know how it happened. I ended up applying for an ad in a newspaper. This little company selling Fuller Brush, a little household cleaning stuff. And it looked like it was good money. I was 16, and I ended up knocking on doors selling Fuller Brush. How many people know what Fuller Brush products are? Yeah, you remember those little round brushes, and yeah. So I started doing that, and I was really shy. So somebody opens the door, and there's a little shy res kid standing there, you know, with a little kit, and the person knows what it is. And I actually became a good seller because I don't know if they had pity on me or not, but, you know, I'll take this, I'll take that, and, you know. But that helped break some of that shyness, and I got, you know, pretty good communication skills and begin to kind of steady people. And one of the sales places I went to, there was another sales distributor who liked my approach, I guess, of being shy. He hired me, gave me better wages, and that was the Kirby vacuum cleaner. So I got to selling Kirby's. Yeah, this little shy kid. I tease about it, but yeah, that's a little bit story of it, you know. Yeah. And yeah, I eventually went to Arizona State University. I didn't make it through. I bombed. Res kid, discovered urban Indians. I discovered Native American nightclubs and parties and a whole world I wasn't used to. and kind of lost myself in that process, you could say. Eventually, U.S. Army got a hold of me, and that kind of saved my life, you could say. I'm a veteran, U.S. Army, got out at Fort Lewis, Washington, and pursued social work. So I'm a social worker by training. Years later, in Minnesota, eventually going back there on the Dakota Sioux side, got involved with environmental issues. In fact, people I've known, they started to have it. They had a big celebration. American Indian movement had a big celebration. I was a dancer. I'm a dancer. And there were some people there, I knew them. They had organized a big national convening at Bear Butte, South Dakota, and around formation of a Native environmental organization. I took a job in northern Minnesota as a solid waste officer for the Red Lake tribe. And that went into also taking care of environmental protection, which there was no programming in that. I became a spokesperson for the lack of federal funding for developing tribal environmental infrastructure. So becoming a spokesperson of that, challenging federal agencies, and got a following of other tribes and tribal managers to create more funding for planning for environmental protection programs. So it's something that really got to my heart, the passion of protection of the health of our people and our children, future generations. And then caught wind of this grassroots movement of tribal community members stepping up. And sometimes challenging our own tribal governments, just like you may challenge your own state government. You may challenge CARB on what they don't do strongly enough. I found that there's quite a movement around that with the California Air Resources Board, and they should be doing more. I'm not familiar with California issues around environmental protection. But the same in Indian country. Some tribes are invested in fossil fuels. Some of them are invested in deforestation. And no different than other governments. So I started to work with grassroots tribal members, giving them information that I had. I know both worlds. I know the white man world, federalism, I know our own. So that's been the formation of the Indigenous Environmental Network. And we do work with tribes too that want to take the high road on building good environmental programs for themselves and their people. So that's how I got involved. Okay. I think that's it, right?
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Time flies. Well, I appreciate